Swing counties. Biden won in 2020. Trump won it in 2016. So we're keeping an eye on it. And you see, this is where Biden was in 2020. This is where Kamala Harris is tonight, 49.4. But there's only 35% of the vote in. So still a lot of vote to be counted there. So we're going to stay and watch that. As we move further west, we have some counties out here, rural counties. This is Wise County. This is Trump country near West Virginia. You can see 94% in. He was at 80.4 in 2020. He's at 81.6. Again, how does he win states like Virginia? They're going to run up the votes in the suburban areas, the Democrats. He runs up the votes in the rural areas. So that's going to be good there for the Republicans if they want to hold those marks. Virginia Beach, this is another area we're going to be watching. Again, an area that sometimes tends to swing. Trump with 48% in 2016. Biden was able to flip it, 30% in. Again, still early, but Trump is ahead there. So we're watching Virginia, guys, and we'll see what happens. We're still waiting for some of the vote to come in here, but some signs that, you know, maybe trouble Democrats, maybe they trouble Republicans as well. We're going to have to wait. Back to you guys.
All right, we shall wait. We do have a key projection right now. The state of Delaware, the home state of the sitting president, Joe Biden, will go for Kamala Harris as expected. Here's how the vote shook out, just 48% in, but this is an easy projection with the margins as they are expected to be. So here's where we fill out our map. At 8:30 on the East Coast, Delaware being added to the tally for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump leading as some of these big states in the South, which are expected to go his way, are starting to report in. Speaking of the South, we've got NBC News correspondent Allison Barber. She's in the key county of Gwinnett County, Georgia. First vote starting to come in there. And what are you hearing? We've got both campaigns really laser focused on this area.
Yeah, they care a lot about this county, Savannah. And let me just show you, because we've just started to see precinct captains coming in with their memory cards, with the votes that happened in person on Election Day. You see this line that goes out the door around. What you're looking at are all of the precinct captains from Gwinnett County. Ultimately, what they're doing is they're coming in here. They have with them little bags that are secured with the official election seal on the top of the envelope and memory cards, and at least 2 from each precinct that have the total of votes for today. So they come in here, they check in with these folks, and then they ultimately take their memory cards to the different election workers that are sitting around here, and they open up, they look at those envelopes, make sure they're sealed properly, make sure it has everything necessary by Georgia law inside of it, and then they send them back into this room here, where we start to see those votes processed and then sent out to the public. In addition to all that's happening on here, back here, and come with me, we'll weave a little through everyone here, there's more counting going on in the back. You mentioned this county is really important to both political campaigns. I will tell you why. This is a rapidly growing county in the state of Georgia. It's also incredibly diverse. It leans blue, but back in 2020, Donald Trump carried about 40% of the vote in Gwinnett County. And ultimately, what Republicans in the Trump campaign were looking for tonight is to see if they could increase turnout just enough where they run up the margins by a few percentage points and hold on to Republican strongholds in the state, and then are maybe well positioned to carry this state. Democrats, the Harris campaign, they were also hoping to up their turnout here so they could create that blue wall Tom has been talking so much about in Metro Atlanta. And a lot of it has been happening in here tonight. Keep coming a little this way, because one of the most significant aspects of tonight that we've watched in here are the early votes, early in-person voting numbers in this county. Over 50% of active voters in Gwinnett County alone voted early. That's either by mail-in ballots or early in person. Back over here, you see all these things. I've been describing them today almost as like trash cans, but what's inside of them? All of the in-person early votes, about 300,000 of them. There was a team of election workers here who had been sequestered since 9 a.m., prepping all of these so they could process and get the early numbers out quickly. Every election official and the supervisor of Gwinnett County elections has told us they've been on track to hit all of their markers to have results in on the earlier side, and they're still working over here tonight. This is where the mail-in ballots will come through and are coming through, and they're sorting all of those. Ultimately, we're going to see more ballots coming from the individual precincts from Election Day to the other side here, where they'll count and go through all of that. The big question here is going to be, what does turnout look like? Did for the Republicans and Trump, did they nudge up what they did in 2020 a little better this year, enough to possibly chip away at Harris's margins and then maybe take the state along with keeping Republican strongholds? And for Harris and Democrats, were they able to reach out to people they described as likely Harris voters who were hard to reach, people who would probably vote Democrat but maybe hadn't voted in past elections? The local county Democrats, they told us they spent a lot of time trying to reach those voters, canvassing, directly targeting ads to them, and sending a lot of mailers in more than a dozen languages to try to get them out. So far, we're told, and you can just see the scale of everything here, the supervisor for Gwinnett County elections, he told us that they are on target right now to surpass voter turnout compared to 2020 by 6:30 today. They had 70% voter turnout roughly in this county. That's exactly what they had back in 2020. So they think they are going to have more turnout in this county. And for both Republicans and Democrats, that's exactly what they were hoping to see. But the big question is, how do those votes fall? And remember, 2020, we saw in the midterms a lot of split ticket voters, Republicans who voted for Republican Governor Brian Kemp, despite Trump saying, hey, that's not somebody I support, and him coming out against him in the midterms, and then voting for the Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. The question tonight in this county is, could that happen again? And the numbers, at least in terms of the totality, are inching up past what both campaigns were hoping to see tonight. Savannah?
All right, Ellison, thank you. Gwinnett County's late rallies by Donald Trump there in that county and neighboring Cobb County. And you got to hand it to the election workers. They're so focused.
That's what I was thinking as I was watching that.
She walks right by and they don't even look up. They don't even look up. They're counting the votes. It makes you feel good about democracy at work.
These are the heroes of the night.
Yes, absolutely.
There's also a storyline in Georgia about election workers, of course, right? And the threats that election workers have faced in so many of these battleground states. And you look at Georgia, that is the home, of course, of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who were two elections workers who came under fire, faced death threats, faced severe hardship in their lives because of those election fraud lies from former President Trump. So these election workers, man, are they doing a civic duty for everybody?
My favorite part of voting is when I walk in and see the smiley faces. They've got this great task in front of them, and it's
Well, true. Hug an election worker if they consent.
Yeah. And it's part of the story of tonight, though, and tomorrow morning, because they've brought on more election workers in all of these states to make sure that they can count more quickly. I do think Ellison's report was fascinating. Gwinnett County, it went for Clinton by 6 points, for Biden by 18 points. So this is a county that Democrats have been increasingly eyeing, as have Republicans.
Well, we talk about the gender gap as I go to Senator McCaskill and Sarah Fagan. I mean, I mentioned there were Trump rallies in Gwinnett County. One of them was the one where Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News host, talked about daddy's coming home and going to give a little girl a spanking, like, the sheriff's come into town, which is a message that, if you're trying to reach female voters, I don't know how the females on this panel feel about that. But that's where that happened.
Not good. Don't feel good about that.
Yeah.
I think most women don't feel good about that. But, you know, I come from a state that is very Trump heavy. So I certainly know that there are women out there that have bought what he's selling. I like to say I think there's about a third of the Trump voters that don't believe a word he says, but they really like the idea that their tax cut's going to stay in place, and they think their business interests are going to be better protected with less regulation. And then 2/3 of the Trump voters who believe every word he says and like it just fine.
Sarah, I want to get your thought on something at work right now. And there was a bit of a mixed message in the campaign, the Donald Trump's campaign, about early voting. Yes, do it, don't do it. How do you think that is playing out tonight?
Well, if you look at some of the early vote returns, certainly we saw higher numbers of Republicans voting early. You know, it looks to me like a lot of those were election day voters previously who voted early. Okay, great for the Trump campaign. They banked votes. They can focus on those who haven't voted. So to me, what I'm going to be looking for is his share of the early vote higher than it was in 2020? Democrats dominated the early vote totals in 2020. And, you know, Donald Trump in most of these states was doing 35, not even higher than 40% in any of those states, these target states we've been talking about all night. So does he do 42, 43, 44%?
I mean, in 2020, we were in the midst of a pandemic. Donald Trump was actively telling people not to vote early or not vote by mail, saying he was suspicious of it. To Lester's point, he changed that too. Now they're actively encouraging Republican voters to go in and early vote, and Republican voters seem to have answered that call.
That's right. It was a huge strategic blunder in 2020 to have done that, particularly in a close race. Had he not done that, perhaps he would have won. So I think he learned that lesson. And also, if you just look at the trends in early voting and the trends in absentee by states, it's the prudent thing to do.
To be clear, the Republican apparatus absolutely made a big push this cycle to get voters out to vote early. Donald Trump himself was all over the map on that. You see it at his rallies. He talks about at one rally, he would say, go out and do it. At another rally, he would cast doubt on the validity of ballots that were put in through the mail, et cetera. Some of that likely seeped down to some of his voters in some of these key battleground states, as we heard from talking to voters in some of these battlegrounds. Remember that this is a former president who, over the summer, you look at let's say 20 rallies, at 5 of them, he cast doubt on the results of the election even before votes were counted. That ramped up in just the last month. At 14 of 20 rallies, he did the same thing. So he has not been super consistent on this.
Let's go to Tom Llamas right now. Tom, as we speak, North Carolina, Georgia, and Pennsylvania are counting votes right now.
Yeah, and we're getting ready for poll closings in places like Nebraska. And Nebraska could be the key to it all. And I know what you're saying, Nebraska? Yes. So when you look at our beautiful map here, you see the maps, the states that are red, the states that are blue, and our battlegrounds here that aren't colored in. And then Nebraska and Maine, they have this kind of Where's Waldo effect. When we hit it, here's why. Nebraska and Maine, they both give out their electors a little differently, their electoral votes. If you win the popular vote, you get 2 in Nebraska, and then they give them by congressional district as well. Trump is going to win 2 of the congressional districts, most likely, in the popular vote. But Congressional District 2, CD2 in Nebraska, is a battleground district. And the entire election, I say, could come down to this. Let me explain why. So let's take you to Nebraska and show you where CD2 is. It's essentially the city of Omaha, right? I'm going to draw it for you and then show you the congressional district. It's the city of Omaha, a little bit of Saunders, and then a little bit of Sarpy as well. I should say all of Saunders as well. That's essentially the way it looks, right? I'm going to give you the congressional map so we can cut it out a little more. So this right here, that's Congressional District 2. It's a swing district, as I said. 2016, Trump wins by 6,000 votes. In 2020, Biden wins by 20,000 votes. So why is it important? Because if we come down to that scenario where it's 269, 269, Savannah, I gamed that out. It's going to come down to Nebraska, too. So every vote does matter. It matters so much that we spoke to people in Omaha asking them about what this campaign was like. They say they've never seen anything like it. They've been inundated with ads saying on the television, on the radio, people calling them, unlike anything they've ever seen before. Again, it likely won't come down to Nebraska, too, but it might, and that's why every vote matters. Again, Omaha, the biggest area of Nebraska, fastest growing area, and tonight we'll be watching it.
Tom, you promised me you would not raise the specter of the 269 to 269.
It could happen. We're ready for it.
It could happen. The Constitution has provisions for it, but can we just all agree? Let's hope we don't
Wait,
get
what's
there.
that sound? Is that Chuck Todd's music?
Yeah, no, that's it. Is that Chuck Todd's head exploding? Yes, perhaps it is. But you know, it's interesting to see these are such contested races, and it's actually nice to see. I think we've divided our country so much into red and blue. It's nice to see that once you get on a county by county level, all of these states they're not monolithic. There's more to it, and we still do live right next to each other. And Nebraska too is a very good example of that.
Yeah, but I would say you're right. We live right next to each other. But the folks that live in Omaha, I guarantee you, some of the folks that live out in a very sparsely populated rural county don't relate to some of the same issues that the people in Omaha think are important. It's much more of an urban area.
There's also a hot Senate race there right now where the Republican
is.
Was expected, you would think, we would just cruise to re-election there, but there's an independent candidate, Dan Osborne, who's really giving a run for her money for Deb Fischer.
Yeah, and I will say that one of the things about the urban-rural issue is when you think about the ground game, I don't think we talk about this enough. The ground game for the Republican Party is much harder. Going door to door in rural communities is a much different operation than going door to door in a densely populated area. It's not as efficient, it's more difficult. Frankly, a lot of folks out in the rural area don't want strangers knocking on their door. They're not used to having people they don't recognize coming up the driveway 2 miles down from their nearest neighbor. So it is harder for the Republican Party to do the ground game, the GOTV, as you talked about earlier, than it is for the Republican Party. But it'll be interesting to see how this independent does in Nebraska. He says he's going to be independent. He won't caucus with either party. He won't vote for either leader. He says his job would be to try to bring the two parties together. It's probably a winning message right now. I just don't know if Nebraska's pretty red.
All right, well, the drama is continuing to build. 3 big battlegrounds closing at the top of the next hour. Don't go away. We'll be right back as we count down the road to 270. Take care of yourself and each other.
Welcome back. It's election night in America, and we're just getting started. Almost 9 o'clock here in the East. We're going to have a bunch of poll closing, 3 big battlegrounds that will close. They are make or break races on the road to 270. We're talking about the presidential race a lot for good reason. As I turn to Kristen Walker and Hallie Jackson, there is also hanging in the balance tonight the balance of power. Who controls Congress? Who controls the Senate? Who controls the House? And we've got some results there.
That's right. And Republicans need 2 seats to win control of the Senate. So far, they have one pickup. So let's go to the board. We'll show you where things stand right now. In West Virginia, as we have already reported, Jim Justice has won this seat after Senator Joe Manchin, who was a Democrat, who then switched to an independent, announced he was not running for re-election. This is expected. It is the first Republican pickup, so that makes this significant. We can call that Rick Scott has held on to his Senate seat in Florida handily. He first won this seat back in 2018. This was one of these races where reproductive rights was a big issue. Former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell trying to make that the big focus of the race, but it was not enough to get her over the finish line. We're watching this very closely, the Senate race in Ohio, too early to call. Senator Sherrod Brown looking for a fourth term against former car dealer, Trump-backed businessman Bernie Moreno, so we'll watch that closely. Pennsylvania, another big battleground. Senator Bob Casey with 67% of the vote. Dave McCormick with 30.4% of the vote. Too early to call with just 13% in. Let's take a look at the big picture here. Again, Republicans have now picked up one seat for the Senate at this hour, 42 to 33. We'll continue to watch this
very quickly. Hallie, taking a step back, the Republicans need 2 seats, and this is a map that is very difficult for Democrats to hold on to their Senate races. They're on defense in a lot of these states.
Yeah, and the reason for that is likely Montana. This is the other pickup that Republicans feel very confident about. They think they'll be able to get. I will tell you that Ohio Senate race being too early to call is interesting. I talked with one Senate Republican source who said, you know, they would have loved to see that call an hour ago, right? They would have loved to have had that in the bag, these 2-seat pickups earlier in the night, Savannah. But we'll wait and see how this one goes.
Okay, we are just coming up the top of the hour. We're going to have some major battleground poll closings coming up. And we continue to come,
and Wisconsin, Arizona, all coming up. So this is the drama beginning to clearly build right now. The votes are being counted, and again, we'll get those closings here very shortly. Let's check back into the presidential race and the road to 270. All right, it is 8:51 in the East, and here is where we stand right now on the road to 270. And it has been a night of big surprises so far, with more to come. We're now just minutes away from additional closings.
Yeah, we are, and we see that map starting to fill out, so we will watch for those next poll closings. It's in all corners of the country now, almost at 9 o'clock in the East Coast, and they're some of the biggest states to close yet.
At the top of the hour, a major round of poll closings with the most battleground states of the entire night.
15 states and 163 electoral college votes up for grabs, including 3 critical swing states.
Will Vice President Kamala Harris hold on to the blue wall that cuts through Wisconsin?
Good evening, Wisconsin!
And Michigan.
Michigan, we are not going back.
Or will former President Trump break through like he did in 2016?
We are going to win Wisconsin.
Plus, the first Western battleground, Arizona, moments away from closing.
A very big hello, Arizona. We love you, Arizona.
Arizona, we need to fight this battle on every front.
We are standing by for our first vote count in from these make-or-break states as our decision desk gets ready to make new calls on the road to 270.
Many votes to be counted, battlegrounds all coming in. Michigan has 15 electoral votes up for grabs, a key state. And Jesse Kirsch in Detroit for us today. Jesse, the polls are just about to close, moments away. What do you expect? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so Savannah, statewide, they close at 9 p.m. Eastern, but here in Detroit, in the East Coast time zone, the polls have been closed for almost an hour. You can see this ballot drop box is sealed off here. However, despite all of that, we're going to move down the block here. This is the city elections office. And what we've got going on here is people who have been in line well past when the polls officially closed to continue registering to vote. And inside, it appears we do still have some people in that line. We had people telling us they'd waited in line for around 4 hours. One young woman told us that she almost got out of line because of that duration, dealing with logistics as well as just waiting to be able to register to vote, but was ultimately able to do so. Someone else told us that they got out of line because of the wait. If people got in line by 8 p.m. Eastern time and they closed the doors here at that time, people were going to be allowed to go through the registration process, and it seems people are still going through that at this hour. This is a traditional Democratic stronghold, the city of Detroit. However, when we've spoken to GOP operatives in the state, they tell us that they see Vice President Harris's base as, quote, crumbling because of various headwinds. However, there are other potential headwinds that could send traditionally Republican voters toward the vice president. We will have a clearer answer as those results start coming in at 9 p.m. Eastern. Savannah, back to you.
And we'll get a better idea about turnout, too, which is all important for the Harris campaign in Detroit and also those collar counties. But we want to switch over. Let's go to Arizona, the Mountain West. Polls closed. Gotti Schwartz, they're outside of polling place. Have you seen a lot of crowds?
Yeah, polls close in about 6 minutes here. This is the end of the line, and this is about a 60 to 70 minute wait here. So you got the people that are at the end of the line right now, probably about 300 to 400 people in front of them. You're noticing a lot of MAGA hats here talking about the gender divide. Gender divide is very much in play here at Arizona State University, and there's been so much talk about low propensity voters. One of the things that we've been noticing here and talking to students about is the involvement of fraternities. Normally, fraternities, they may not be organizing and may not be turning out to vote as much as you'd expect, but here at the ASU campus, it does seem like the fraternities have been involved in turning out the vote, and those that we've been talking to say that they are turning out for former President Donald Trump. We've also talked to a lot of other students that have been coming out for policy issues. There are several props. The issue of abortion is extremely important in turning out the vote. Immigration is also important, but I gotta say, just eavesdropping what people have been talking about in line, it's been surprising how often the topic of the Joe Rogan podcast keeps coming up. We've talked to several students now who say that they listened to that Joe Rogan podcast with the former president, and that was the deciding factor for them. And they've also said that if the Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, would have appeared on that podcast, they may have had their vote skewed. It's really interesting because, you know, some people are talking about policy. Others are talking more about kind of like vibes. Well, I like the vibe of Trump, or I like the vibe of Kamala Harris, but it's not so policy specific. But that's just some of what we've seen. We're almost to the end of the line. We just wrap around this corner. But again, right now we're in Maricopa County. This is a county with 2 point something million voters. ASU has 74,000 students here, most of them voting age. So what we see here at Arizona is going to be very important in this election. Back to you guys.
All right, Gotti, thank you so much. Abortion on the ballot in Arizona, also Florida. Lester, I know you got a key call here.
Yeah, we do have a call here in the state of Florida that abortion, that would restore the constitutional right to an abortion there, but had a 60% threshold. It will not clear it. So Amendment 4, right to abortion, will go down in defeat. 86% of the vote in there. Let's.
This is super interesting. I'll just drop in here to say this. Okay, it was yes to protect in Florida, but you are seeing it needed a 60% threshold, as you said, Lester. This would be the first ballot initiative that we've seen anywhere in the country since the overturning of Roe versus Wade that has failed. However,
but it had a higher vote.
The other ballot initiatives were not this high of a threshold here, and I see you want to jump in.
No, it's just the same number, right? It was 57, 58 in Ohio, 57, 58 in Kansas. I mean, I think we know what the number is. Ironically, I've talked to some Florida Republicans who secretly had hoped this would pass, because now Florida elected officials in 2026, which is their big election year, they will have to face the voters on a 6-week ban. And then suddenly that will sort of upend just the state's politics.
Yeah.
But
Ron
there's clearly
actively campaigned against this Amendment 4, which is
And he used the government power. It's going to create an interesting, there's going to be a fascinating, if the Democratic Party ever wants to have a chance in Florida again, they're going to get an opportunity, ironically, because this thing went down tonight.
Think about how complicated this was for former President Trump. I asked him about this. He said it went too far. And then he was asked about it repeatedly throughout the course of this campaign. Well, how are you going to vote on this? And he was shifting his positions in the weeks leading up to this very vote. So it sort of underscores the point that Chuck's making. This is a very complicated
This issue has Republicans in knots and Donald Trump in knots, and now it lives to see another day in Florida.
And this is why the vice president and her team have been pushing on this issue. It is on the ballot as well in Arizona and Nevada. Trump orbit folks that I'm talking to think that there is a likelihood of perhaps ticket splitters in those states, people who will back these abortion ballot initiatives, but who will also back former President Trump. But you have seen the vice president hammer this in the state of Georgia. She went to the state of Texas, which nobody really thinks is going to flip blue on the presidential race, but she wanted to use it as a stage to highlight that state's controversial restrictive abortion law. She did it in Georgia with Amber Thurman, and in Florida, she talks about it as a place that she is concerned about.
We don't have a ton of time because we're coming up on a poll closing, but in Iowa, whose polls are going to close, there was a late election poll. Iowa just had a very restrictive abortion ban passed. And this shock poll on the eve of the election had Kamala Harris carrying a red state. So it's just a very potent issue.
Not to overread into it, but it is an indicator perhaps. And the pollster there, Gold Standard pollster, thought perhaps the abortion issue was motivating these older white women, right? A demographic we've been watching tonight.
And Chuck, well, let's go to the election and we'll move right here as we get some more poll closings here. We can give a few more characterizations. In just 3 seconds, all of these states will see their polls closed, and we'll begin counting the votes. Here is state of Texas. We were just talking about Donald Trump will win in the state of Texas when all the votes are counted. NBC News projects that Donald Trump will also win in North Dakota tonight. South Dakota, same story. That will also go into the Donald Trump column this evening. We move to the state of Wyoming. In 3 electoral votes at stake, Donald Trump, the projected winner in Wyoming. Here's the map. The road to 270 now getting interesting. 154 for Donald Trump, 30 for Kamala Harris.
All right, let's go to the uncalled races just from those 9 o'clock poll closings, including New York, Colorado, Minnesota. So we still await results there. But let's go to Michigan. That's the biggie at this hour. Polls closing in Michigan, and it is, wait for it, too early to call. We will be waiting for it perhaps into the wee hours tonight. Arizona also too early to call. 7 o'clock in the Mountain West, 9 o'clock on the East Coast. Polls just closed there. Let's go to Wisconsin, the other of the blue wall states, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania, too early to call. And speaking of Pennsylvania, too early to call. Starting to see more vote come in, but we could be waiting a bit for that. And same with North Carolina. They're counting more quickly, but it's still too early for us to make a projection. And in Georgia, it's not too early. It's just too close. We are starting to see the vote come in. We've got 66% counted right now. And yet, despite the margin that you see there, we project not only what the margin is right now, but where we expect the vote to come in, whether it's coming from a Republican stronghold or a Democratic stronghold. So when you see that disparity and then you see us say it's too close to call, there's a method to that madness, Tom, and you've got Georgia up there.
And I'm going to explain the method to the madness, right? The difference right now, 220,000 votes. Trump on top with 66% of the vote in. But Republicans, it can't even get close to celebrating just yet. These sort of UFO objects we have circling Georgia right now, this is the remaining vote. And the bigger that bubble, that means the more vote that is out. And the more vote that is out right now is in the Atlanta metro region. Remember, I told you guys earlier that about 50% of the vote is going to come from this area right here. The election is essentially won or lost in the Atlanta metro region because the margins are so close. Every vote matters, but because the margins are so close, Trump runs up that rural vote. The Democrats run up the urban vote. They run up the suburban counties around Atlanta as well. Let's take a look. Let's see how Atlanta and the surrounding counties are looking, the ring counties. Cobb County, 77% of the vote is in. Harris slightly overperforming where Biden was in 2020. Let's go over to Fulton County. This is where Atlanta is, a huge county for Democrats here. She's about where Biden was, 72% of the vote in. She can catch up and bring that up. Gwinnett County, again, these are the counties that Clinton flipped in 2016, and they just got bluer and bluer. And you can see what's happening here. 16% of the vote is in, but she's at 60. Biden was at 58. Let's keep going around here. Douglas County, 84% in. Here we go. Harris overperforming in that county. We'll come a little further out. Rockdale County will kind of move a little out the suburbs, the exurbs, if you will. 69%. Look at where Harris is tonight. 74%. She's running up that vote in the Atlanta metro region. If she can keep that momentum going, she could possibly take the state of Georgia. But again, we got to wait and see. I want to see how Trump is doing in some of his rural counties. 78%, 95% of the vote is in. So 78% in 2020. He's at 78 right now. Let me go to a neighboring Towns County right here, 81-80, and then in Union, 81-80. He seems to be hitting his marks, too. I want to hit some sort of swing counties, if you will. Dooley is one of these. Trump won it in 2016, but if we go back, Obama had it in 2012. Tonight, Trump is up. He's building on his margins from 2020. That's a good sign for him. Let me see if Peach County is in. Peach County is another one that now no vote is in. This is one of those swing counties, not a whole lot of voters, but it usually sort of picks the winner. We like to watch it as we go around. Muskogee, this is 72%. This is one of the ones we're watching to see if Trump could make inroads with black voters here. Harris seems to be comfortable. She seems to be at the same watermark where Biden was in 2020. So guys, still very close in Georgia. As we said, too close to call. It was about 12,000 votes that separated this in 2020. Trump won this state by about 5 percentage points in 2016. The state is definitely changing, and the reason why it's changing, it's in this Atlanta metro region.
Yeah.
Go
for North Carolina, I'd love to see some North Carolina numbers. I mean, these numbers are coming in as we speak.
Yeah, let's hit North Carolina. Again, we're going to look at all the state. I'm going to be looking at Mecklenburg County. This is where Democrats have to drive up the vote. Only 6% is in, but we can see how she's performing here. You know, 6% is in. I'm not going to really draw too much from there, but she's overperforming Biden. We go to the research triangle here, Wake County. 76% of the vote is in. We compare her to Biden, 62 to 63. She's doing better. I know a lot of the vote is in. Over here in Orange County. This is UNC Chapel Hill, the research triangle. You have medical research jobs, high-tech research jobs, affluent suburbs, highly educated Democratic voters. 86% of the vote is in. Let's see how she compares to Biden. Slightly overperforming Biden, not by much, but look, any little increment makes a difference when you're talking about a 10,000 vote difference at the end of the day. Right now, the difference is about 41,000 in that county. Trump is on top right now. He's going to run up the rural vote. We can check out some of his counties over here in western North Carolina, Graham County. These are some of the counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene and all that devastating flooding. 95% in, 81%. In 2020, he was at 79, so kind of overperforming. The big unknown was how many people were going to actually vote in here. And one of the great researchers, Dr. Chris Cooper of North Carolina, political scientist, pointed out to us. He said, listen, this is Trump's area that was affected by those floods. You can have 9 MAGA hats in your house. But if you no longer have a house, trying to get your vote, trying to get your voting location is going to be difficult. They were so concerned about this area that election officials actually changed the rules so you could actually vote in other counties if you couldn't vote in your own county. It looks like turnout's okay. We heard that from Sam Brock. Asheville is that blue dot in the sea of red in North Carolina. Again, affected by Hurricane Helene, 55% of the vote there in Buncombe County. Biden was at 59. Harris is overperforming. Again, any advantage she has in the counties where Biden was doing well or won, and she's hitting higher marks, Democrats are going to love that news. But there's still a lot of the vote is out, 76% in Wake, like we said. Let me see where else in the state that we're still waiting on vote, because there are a lot of rural counties. Listen, if right now, let me go to the entire state. So 41% of the vote is in. Look at this giant circle around Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte, a lot of that vote, Mecklenburg County, it's a county that is majority minority, right? Mostly black and Hispanic. And they're still waiting a lot of the vote there. That could be a very good sign for Democrats tonight. But some of the vote is out, like in these rural counties right here. If we check out Johnson County, just outside of Raleigh, connected to that, I'm actually kind of curious, even though only 8% is in here. This was a county that they were looking at to see if Democrats could make inroads there. It looks to be about the same, only 8% in, guys. But we're going to keep a close eye on North Carolina as more of this map gets filled out.
All right, so here's where we are, 7 minutes after 9 o'clock in the East Coast. Polls have closed now of 6 of 7 battleground states, still waiting, obviously, for the 7th. Hallie, you heard the numbers. Break it down how we're viewing it through the lens of
through the exit polls, which are coming in. And I got to give the grain of salt caveat, which is these numbers don't get finalized until closer to Thanksgiving, right? So we don't want to overread into them, but they are an indication of where things stand. And what I'm looking at, given that polls have just closed now in the rest of the blue wall states, Michigan and Wisconsin, here's something interesting. Look at the youth vote here. This is a little tricky to look at, but I'm going to walk you through it. Look at Vice President Kamala Harris, she is winning younger voters under the age of 30 in Wisconsin, but Donald Trump is right on her heels there with 47%. He is actually winning younger voters in Michigan, 51% to 46%. And if you take a look even further into this, you can see that he is overperforming where he was among young voters in the state of Wisconsin, 47% now. That's a double-digit increase from where he was 4 years ago. It's a similar story in Michigan, and I will also tell you it is a similar story in Pennsylvania as well. You see the Michigan numbers here. Similar story in Pennsylvania as well when it comes to young voters. Now, we've been doing a lot of point-counterpoint tonight, so let me fill you in as I walk back to the desk. One of the counterpoints here is in Michigan and Wisconsin, Vice President Harris is doing better with older voters than she was relative to 2020. So there's some interesting dynamics at play here.
Well, it's interesting because we saw Gadi Schwartz in Arizona on the campus of Arizona State University, which gives me personal pain as a graduate at the University of Arizona. But I mean, he may be in ground zero of this very thing that exit poll is showing, which is young voters, young male voters, which the Trump campaign worked very hard to turn out, are responding accordingly. Some of them talking about this Joe Rogan podcast. Can't say I'm a regular listener to it, but he endorsed on the eve of the election, and that was extremely influential.
It could be very influential. And remember, in some of these states, you have same-day voter registration. And who takes the most advantage of it? Younger voters.
That's right.
You know, it was interesting. A lot of Democrats were very optimistic about some of their chances in some of the big Midwestern states for House, Senate, and the presidency, because unlike 2020, the Ann Arbor kids are going to vote in Michigan this time. In 2020, they voted in their home state. The Iowa City kids in Iowa, the Madison kids, and that this time they were all going to actually be in the battleground states.
Because of the pandemic, they were home.
The pandemic, they were home and more dispersed. Obviously, a big chunk of Michigan voters are from Michigan, University of Michigan folks from Michigan, but there's quite a few that aren't. And Democrats thought that could be a secret weapon for them. If the young men are pulling for Trump, then it's not as much of an impact. Still, there's a massive gender gap among young folks. Let's not. In fact, it may be bigger among young voters
young
than
men
any
young
other
women.
age group.
And then we've seen as Laura Jarrett joins the table here, and I know you're looking into some of the legal issues, but also following these ballot referenda, including the abortion measure that needed a 60% approval, didn't quite get there, 57%, so it went down to defeat in Florida. But to carry on this conversation, young women have been highly motivated by this issue of reproductive rights.
Women of all ages motivated, young and old, and obviously it didn't work in Florida, but the threshold was higher there, and we are still looking at a number of states, including places like Arizona, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, all of which would change the right to an abortion to be enshrined in the Constitution, not something that you could take away easily. Once it's there, it can't just be wiped away when the change of legislature happens. And in those cases, it's a much different situation where you have to just get over a 50% threshold. And so it'll be interesting to see whether they can carry the ballot initiatives in those states, even if the former president is going to win in some of those states.
We've seen these ballot measures, pro-abortion ballot measures, even in very red states, pass and sometimes pass with 56, 57% of the vote, which, by the way, is what they got in Florida.
There has been a significant shift in the electorate, if these exit polls bear out to what we see right now, into how people feel about abortion rights and abortion access since 4 years ago. I would suspect it is entirely probably because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. In 2020, 51% of people felt that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. You know what it is now? 66%. That is a significant jump.
Let me just quickly interrupt. We go back to this second, but I believe we have another call to make, and this is in the state of Mississippi. NBC News now projects that Donald Trump will take all 6 electoral votes and will win in Mississippi. There is the breakdown right now, 21,000 vote difference, 10% in, but again, Donald Trump, the projected winner in Mississippi. Here's the map. Here's where it leaves us in the road to 270. Donald Trump well out in front with 160. Kamala Harris now with 30.
Let's expand the conversation. Simone Sanders Townsend, former spokesperson to Kamala Harris. I wonder what you're seeing in these numbers. I assume you have good sources inside the campaign. What are you hearing?
Greetings, everyone. It's good to see you. So what I am hearing is that Democrats writ large in all of the battleground states, and I've been talking to party chairs, folks within the campaigns, but also the organizers on the ground, they're feeling encouraged by what they're seeing from college campuses specifically. In Wisconsin, for example, in the 3rd Congressional District, there are 2 large college campuses in that state, and as one individual in Wisconsin told me, that they could flip a House district seat. In Philadelphia, the turnout in Philly specifically has surprised some Democrats. From in Baltimore, D.C., New York, there were buses that left early this morning of strategists, organizers, even some donors, and they all went down and knocked doors in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area and Philadelphia suburbs. Well, the numbers coming out of places like Temple University, where the lines were so long, people were standing in lines for 3 hours, college campus, they had to add more voting machines. They were not expecting that, Democrats particularly in Pennsylvania, so they're encouraged, what I'm told, by the raw data, emphasis on the raw data they're seeing. So they don't want to speak out of turn, but they feel all right.
Yeah, Simone, what is worrying the Harris camp right now, looking at it from the other end of the glass?
Well, the lines are very long, and they want people to stay in line, Lester. I'm told that actually in Pennsylvania specifically, celebrities are FaceTiming in to the people who are in line, encouraging them to stay in line. So the organizers are out there with the phones saying, hey, so-and-so is on the line. There are concerts actually happening. They are looking at Pennsylvania very closely. And as the time that the vice president spent in the state, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I think is also indicative of where they see some gaps. Also, obviously, DeKalb County, in Georgia, the lines, the polling locations were staying open longer because of the bomb threats that were happening there and the evacuations that had to happen, encouraging people to know that it is safe to vote, stay in line, make your voice count. I think they want to ensure, they feel like that they can eke it out if people turn out to vote and stay in line.
All right. Simone, thanks very much.
We want to turn now to Garrett Haake. He's at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. And we just got the inside scoop from the Harris campaign. So what are you hearing from the Trump campaign about what they're seeing in these battleground states in the early going?
Savannah, the Trump campaign is very buoyed by what they've seen out of Wisconsin, specifically among black voters. They're pointing to our exit poll, which shows Donald Trump more than doubling his support among African Americans in Wisconsin. I cannot emphasize enough how much this has been an emphasis for the Trump campaign to try to improve their margins. They got blown out with African American voters in 2020. If they were able to move the percentage that they got from 8% to 10, 12, 15, in this case, based on these early exit polls, getting 20% in Wisconsin, that's the kind of thing that could make a huge difference in a race that might be decided by 15 or 20,000 votes in those states. They spent heavily on television, they spent heavily on African-American media, trying to find celebrity validators for Donald Trump, and particularly to reach out to young men. If Trump pulls this off tonight or in the days to come, those small changes at the margins among African-American men, I think, will be a huge part of this story.
All right, Garrett, thank you. I want to go over to Peter Alexander at Harris headquarters, Washington, D.C. And how's the feeling there? What's the vibe?
Well, there's still a celebratory feel here right now. They're waiting for any particular data points that they can know if it's a good indication or not. The Harris campaign individuals still watching behind closed doors. The vice president watching alongside family and friends tonight. A lot of the donors and other big supporters of the vice president's at a hotel here in Washington, D.C. watching as well before they arrive here a little bit later this evening. I'll tell you some of the data points that they are pointing to right now as potentially some good indicators. One comes out of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, specifically as it relates to those 3 wards with the largest densities of Puerto Rican voters right now, that they say in those particular wards that they saw as of 5 o'clock, 3 hours before the polls closed, they had already reached the same number in terms of turnout as they had 4 years ago, which is to say that they believe that they are exceeding the numbers in the past. They think that's a good indication there. I'll punctuate a thought that Simone Sanders was just sharing a short time ago. I am hearing again about those college campuses right now, everywhere from Nevada, UNLV, all the way to a series of separate campuses in Philadelphia itself. Temple, one of them that they named Lehigh, Lafayette, elsewhere in the state as well. And she was talking about what is really key to the campaign right now in these sort of late evening hours, even after the polls have closed. They don't close if you are already in line. It's a message that they're sharing right now, FaceTiming in Jennifer Gardner and Demi Moore, among others, to keep those folks in line.
All right, Peter.
Simone was making that point a moment ago about it. That they can keep them in line.
You can keep them in line if Jennifer Garner's on the other line talking to your mom or Paul Rudd, and that's the strategy there. We've got a race to call here. Louisiana, no big surprise, but if you're filling out your map at home, you can add Louisiana there. Just 22% of the vote counted, but again, the margin expected to be rather large. So here's the map for for those watching at home. The South, of course, reliably red for Donald Trump, and at this early hour, he is far out in front, but we await those key battleground states, and I think we've got Tom over there talking the great state of Ohio, a former battleground.
Semi-battleground, right? We got exit poll data out of Ohio as well. 17 electoral votes, about 55% of the vote is in. Trump is on top by about 266,000 votes. I want you to remember that number. Write it down if you can. I know it's kind of a big number, 266,000. The reason why I want to highlight that difference, because when we punch up Ohio here, so that's the spread, 287. It just changed. That's how fast voting data is coming in. Again, you know I love going to this. The remaining vote that's there. Again, here's the issue. The remaining votes in the Democratic counties like Franklin, which is Columbus, Cuyahoga, Cleveland. Look at the numbers here. In Cuyahoga, look how many votes are still out. 377,000. She's on top by 71%. Let's see how she did compared to Biden 4 years ago. 66%. So she's overperforming in Cuyahoga, and there's still a lot of that vote that's out. Let's go down to Franklin County. It holds the capital of Ohio, Columbus, 68%. Overperforming there with about 60% of the vote that's in. And then again, 266,000 remaining. So just those two counties, we're talking about more than 500,000 votes. And that's way bigger than the spread for the entire state.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, when you talk about some of her overperforming in those areas, the reason we expect Ohio likely goes red, but let's talk about the Senate race there. Yeah, because we have the control of Senate hanging in the balance right now, and it hangs on this Senate race.
Yeah.
Bernie Moreno, the car dealer, versus Sherrod Brown, the incumbent. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so look at this, neck and neck. The difference here, only 74,000. So what does that mean? That means the Republican in this race is underperforming Trump. There could be a split ticket issue here. Again, way too early, 56% of the vote in. But look, the difference here is 74,000. Remember that number I was telling you to remember? It was over 200,000. So that means that Trump is overperforming right now. Bernie Moreno is underperforming the Republican candidate. The incumbent is still down. But again, remember what I told you. There's a lot of that vote that's out in Cleveland, in Columbus. I'm going to look in one more spot here. Let's get back to the president's race in Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati. She's at 62%. Biden was at 57%. Again, look, this could be some of the early vote that's come in. It could be some of that blue mirage. Again, we're prefacing this is all early, but I'm going to get back over to you guys because there's a projection.
Yeah, Tom, we got a projection in the state of Rhode Island. NBC News projects that Kamala Harris will win in Rhode Island when all the votes are counted. 4 electoral votes for her. Here's where the breakdown is. 31,000 vote difference, 74% of the vote in, but again, Kamala Harris, the projected winner there. Let's pull up the map, the road to 270. That brings Harris now to 34 electoral votes. Donald Trump still well out in front with 168. Remember, 270 is the prize that we're working our way toward. We'll take a break here. It's 9:30 in the East. The vote counting coming in. Our decision desk standing by to make more projections just ahead. Welcome back on this election night. The road to 270. You can see Donald Trump out front with 168 to 34 for Kamala Harris. Let's show you how we can characterize some of the states right now. These are states that haven't been called. Virginia, our characterization on that is it's too early to call. More than half the vote in there as well. Let's look at Ohio. We were speaking that a moment ago. 17 electoral votes, not considered to be a battleground. Nonetheless, we look at it, that's too early to call right now. Also, Colorado, too early to call. Kamala Harris leading now with over 100,000 votes. In Iowa, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, that is too early to call as well. Let's go over to Tom Yamas right now, who can give us a little bit breakdown on the path to 270. Clearly, at this point, they're both wide open.
Yes, still very early. So far, no big surprises. If you're watching at home, you can find your state here. We've already given some. We've projected some states for former President Trump, some for the vice president, and still so many, the bulk of states right there in the middle, and still so many people still voting along the West Coast in places like Hawaii and Alaska as well. Let's remind you and walk you through the paths that each candidate hopes to take to get to the White House. Let's start with Vice President Kamala Harris. We'll click her in here, get to 2024. This is the predetermined map of how the states voted in 2020 and then the 7 battlegrounds that will be decided tonight. So her easiest path is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. She holds that blue wall. If she can do that, she gets to 270. If she's having a very rough night and she loses Pennsylvania, loses Michigan, loses Wisconsin, she has other paths, but she does have a Sun Belt path where if she can flip North Carolina, hold Georgia, hold Arizona, and get Nevada, hold it once again, she gets her as well. That path, though, would give Democrats heart palpitations. As far as former President Trump, his easiest route, just think of the east side. He holds Pennsylvania. He flips Pennsylvania. He holds North Carolina. He flips Georgia back. He gets to 270. But if he can't win Pennsylvania, he has to win somewhere else in the blue wall. He has to break through the blue wall. That's the main difference between his path and the vice president's path. There's a path for her, even though she doesn't win any of these 3 big Midwest states. But for him, he has to win one of them. If he wins Michigan and he flips North Carolina, holds Georgia, he can win any of these 2 out west, either Nevada or Arizona, put him over the top. But if he can only win Wisconsin, I'm going to take Nevada away. He has to win Arizona to get to 272. So you can see it's going to be a long night for us. But every state sort of leads to a domino effect, if you will. And that's one of the reasons why we were watching Ohio, because if he were not to win a state like Ohio, which he won the last 2 presidential elections, his whole map changes. Guys, back to you.
Well, right now, so far tonight, we haven't had any big shockers. But let's talk about Pennsylvania. There's a reason that the campaigns spent more money there, spent more time there. It may well, at the end of this night, or perhaps it will be Saturday morning, like in 2020, it will all come down to Pennsylvania.
It very well could come down to Pennsylvania. 19 electoral votes. It is the biggest battleground prize out there. And part of why we're watching states like Ohio so closely, like North Carolina as well, particularly in the suburbs, is to test how those counties, in those collar counties in Pennsylvania might go. Remember, President Biden won Pennsylvania not because he won the Philadelphia County area, but because he was able to really drive up the vote among white working class voters in those collar counties. One more point just to mention as we watch all of these returns come in. When President Biden was at the top of the ticket, a state like North Carolina was out of reach for Democrats. The fact that we're talking about it right now, the fact that there's been so much play in North Carolina, that former President Trump spent so much time there in recent days, underscores the fact that they have tried to open up more paths, and we'll have to see if that was effective at all.
I want to ask a little bit about Michigan. We haven't really talked much about the Gaza war in Gaza and how that might affect the vote, you know, in Detroit and in parts of Michigan. Are we getting any read there at all?
Well, it's going to be something that matters, right? Because we saw that uncommitted vote. We know there's an Arab American population in largely Wayne County. It's only about 2% of the population, but it could be potentially significant here. You saw Vice President Harris, as she was on the campaign trail just in the last few days here, begin her rally speech, one of them in Michigan, by referencing, of course, Israel, Gaza, what was happening. She doesn't typically start off her campaign speeches, her stump speech that way.
But she's been tackled at times.
That's right. She has again and again, she has faced down protesters who heckle. She typically says something along the lines of, you have a right to be heard, so do I, and I'm speaking now, which is a line that she's become sort of known for at this point. But the other piece of this, too, when you look at this, Michigan is a place, it's going to be critical for her, as Tom has just laid out in the map. It is also the place where she started this shift in the last few days on her closing argument, moving away from this idea that Donald Trump was sort of looming large as this threat to democracy, this ominous shadow hanging over America, and shifting away from saying his name at all, calling him the other guy, trying to make him seem small, unserious, Lester.
All right, we have another call to make, and this is a pretty big one. The state of New York, and not necessarily a surprise, but NBC News projects that New York will, Kamala Harris is the projected winner. I'll get this out, projected winner in New York. And there you see the vote difference, 845,000, 33% in. Here's the map to show us where we are on that road to 270. That puts Donald Trump out front with 168. Harris with 62 now.
Let's continue this conversation about Michigan, about young voters, because this issue that you raised, Gaza, Israel, this is a very potent issue with young voters, with the many students. And we see Kamala Harris struggling with that. We've seen ads by third-party groups in Michigan trying to bring up that kind of dissent that is going on. It's very interesting. In the primary, there was an uncommitted vote, sort of a protest vote against President Biden. 100,000 people voted uncommitted in the primary. The margin in 2020 was 154,000. So this is a constituency that very much matters.
Absolutely. And with young voters right now, we just had Hallie, you brought this up on the data wall a little bit ago. Trump is leading young voters. And again, that gender gap is playing out right here. It's large with voters under 30. Of men, 59% going for Trump, 39% going for Harris. Women, 54% Harris, 44% Trump. He's continuing to close those margins. The other thing that's interesting about Michigan, of course, there's a 52,000 person campus, University of Michigan. Back in 2016, Trump only won by about 11,000 votes. On that campus, I actually anecdotally heard students energizing other students by saying, if only a fifth more of this campus were to have come out, it could have made a difference. So what does that look like right now? Who does that mean did better on those campuses if we start to see those margins be eat away at?
And you'll recall back in 2016, sorry, Hallie, you'll recall in 2016, Hillary Clinton, when she did the postmortem of her campaign, the criticism was she didn't spend enough time in Michigan. And so what we've seen from the Harris campaign is she has been there. And Trump has certainly been there as well. He closed out his campaign there. And so the Democrats have tried to learn from the mistakes of the past. Trump has been very focused on that area as well because he knows he's got to.
Well, just to demonstrate how complicated politics is, Harris is on defense to a certain extent over her stance with Gaza and Israel, the Biden administration stance in Michigan, but then also losing some of the Jewish vote, for example, in Pennsylvania and Florida. We've heard about that anecdotally as well. It's about the bottom of the hour. We can do some race checks here. You mentioned Michigan. Well, let's put it up there. Let's see what we've got in terms of results, and the votes are being counted in Michigan, one of those key Midwest battlegrounds. It is too early to call. That's just about a little over 10% of the vote, but now you've got an eye on what we've got there. Arizona polls just closed a half hour ago. Way too early to call there. It may well be days before we're able to call that one. Wisconsin, another in the industrial Midwest, too early to call. Just starting to get the votes counted. Pennsylvania, stop me if you've heard it before. It may all come down to Pennsylvania, and it is too early to call, but we're about 30% of the vote there. North Carolina, also too early to call at this hour. And staying down south in the Sunbelt state of Georgia, which President Biden carried 4 years ago, and former President Trump badly wants to get back into that red column. That is too close to call at this hour. So here is the road to 270. That is the magic number that a candidate needs to win the White House, and that is where we are in the early going at this hour.
I always wonder what it looks like from the other side, from the candidates, when they're doing the same thing we are, essentially, pulling up these numbers, trying to weed through them, trying to figure out where you can be optimistic, you know, when you don't have the pressure of people looking at you.
You want a fun fact? Fun fact alert?
We love it.
The last election was decided in 4 states by approximately 79, 80,000 voters. You could fit those voters into Cowboy Stadium.
Wow.
That's
You
what
did
we're
your
talking
homework,
about.
girl. Let me
We're
tell
talking
you,
about budget. And believe
that is a good. That's
my
a good
husband's
nugget.
going to be very mad at me that I didn't
brought
say
up the
Eagles
Cowboys.
Stadium, but it wasn't the right number for the stadium. I tried.
You stick with any stadium you want.
Yeah, you got next to polls?
He's sad about the link. Yeah, I do. And this is a more broad look at the issues that voters say are important to them. As we're talking about some of these issues in these key battleground states, nationally, we saw something really interesting here, right? We saw consistently in public polling over the course of months, it's economy, inflation, cost of living that voters said over and over again was the most important issue to them. But look at this electorate. From our exit polls that we're seeing now, and again, this could shift a little bit. These numbers could still change a bit as more waves of information come in. But look at what's number one. 34% of voters say the state of democracy is the most important issue to them. Put a little asterisk next to that. We're going to talk about that more in just a second. Second here, 31% of voters say the economy is the most important issue to them. That is typically what we would see in other elections. It's what we've seen in the past. I would also note that just because a candidate leads on the top issue doesn't mean that they would win the election. Abortion is right there at 14%, immigration trailing at 11%. And why do I bring that up? That was key to former President Trump's close. When you look at the vote breaks for this, which just means who people supported when they said this was their top issue, on state of democracy, voters broke for Kamala Harris. So she leads on that issue. More people who said that democracy was their most important thing backed Kamala Harris than did Donald Trump. She is also leading on abortion as well. It's the flip when you look at economy and immigration. More people who said that the economy or immigration were their most important issue backed former President Trump. That is not altogether shocking, right? Those issues, economy, inflation, immigration, it largely tracks with what we had been seeing over the course of many months since Kamala Harris got into this race in public polling. But here's what's interesting, and let me walk back to the desk with you to talk through some of these democracy issues here. This is a funny question, state of democracy, because there are Republicans who believe that the state of democracy is an existential threat, largely because of the election fraud lies that Donald Trump talks about. There are Democrats who believe that the state of democracy is under threat because of former President Trump himself if he were to be back in office. So this is a tricky one. It's not like it cuts obviously one way or the other. So there's some unpacking to do.
It's a Rorschach test. What is the state of democracy?
That's exactly right.
It would probably be better framed as what do you think the state of the country is? Yeah. Do you think that this is a high-stakes election? Do you think it's a do or die? Is it existential? I think that's what people are responding to, and perhaps why we see that being the top issue.
Well, and it's so mirrored in what we saw in the closing arguments of both of these campaigns. You saw Vice President Kamala Harris try to argue that Donald Trump was a threat to democracy. You saw Donald Trump make arguments that his political rivals were the quote-unquote enemy from within. And so it is a Rorschach test, and it also just speaks to why, as we watch these states come in, the battlegrounds seem to be very sharply divided, as our polls indicate.
Right track, wrong track always kind of leaves you with that question. Are we judging a president, or are we judging just the overall sense of life these days?
Absolutely, and the fact that you have this significant majority saying that the country's headed in the wrong direction.
You know what it is?
A challenge.
It's interesting because we haven't talked that much about that thing that happened this summer where Joe Biden had a terrible debate and he was expected for 18 months to be the candidate and then he wasn't. Do we have any indication in any of these early numbers how Kamala Harris is performing?